A reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13, verses 24 through 37. But in those days after that supper, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory.
Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gates.
Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about the day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come.
It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake.
Holy wisdom, holy word. Thanks
be to God.
Welcome to the season of Advent, the season of waiting and attentively watching for the divine invasion, to use Lamar Williamson's evocative phrase. In this time, we want to be on the lookout, to be awake for Jesus' arrival and return, for God's power, God's inbreaking. Advent is a time that brings judgment on our ordinary ways of doing things. As we sang in our opening hymn, O day of God, draw nigh, in beauty and in power. Come with thy timeless judgment now to match our present hour. How would you describe our present hour? A phrase that has been resonating with me as I've been attending to our passage from Mark in recent weeks is terror and hope. Mark's gospel was written in a time much like ours, a time of terror and a time of hope. We hear of new terrors every day, in war zones, in our city streets, in climate reports, in our own circles of family and friends. You know the news as well as I do. You know the fears that haunt us. As people of the living God, we take these terrors seriously, but we are also called to hope, the virtue that looks for God's presence with us, shaping a new future, as the hymn says, in beauty and in power. The reading from Mark's gospel that we've just heard is the second half of Jesus' farewell address to his disciples. They are facing the upcoming terror of Jesus' arrest and death, which Mark will describe in subsequent chapters. A very present terror for Mark's community, living a couple of generations later, was the destruction of the temple and the city of Jerusalem by the armies of Rome in the year 70. At the start of our chapter, the disciples admire the great stones of the temple, and they're taken aback when Jesus says that those stones soon will no longer be standing one on another. And naturally, they ask, well, when will this take place and what will be the warning signs? And Jesus answers their questions, but as is so often the case, not really in the way they expected. But along the way, he exhorts them over and over, beware, be alert, stay awake. Jesus warns them not to be deceived into premature panic, not to follow false messiahs, and not to get hung up on chronological speculations. The terrors of the day are the beginning of the birth pangs. Yes, they're real and they are painful, but they're not to be confused for the real transformative eschatological ending, the birth, the divine invasion. But this invasion is indeed coming, and it offers us hope. It will upend our old ways of doing things. Signs in heaven and earth will be available for all to see. When we contemporary folks hear of stars falling from heaven, we might imagine colliding black holes, supernovas, the birth and death of galaxies. Here on earth, the divine invasion is as sure as the cycle of the seasons, as the budding of the fig tree in summer, new life, promising fruitfulness. This will be a time of ingathering for all those God has chosen from the four winds, from the ends of the earth, from all nations. Now, we don't know when this overturning of the present order will come. Mark didn't know. Even Jesus claimed not to know. And so we must wait. The parable at the end of this chapter tells us to work while we wait. A man leaves his slaves in charge while he goes on a journey, and it's here that we find ourselves. We are to do the work that we have been given to do, indeed, the work we are divinely authorized to do. And like the doorkeeper, we are to stay awake, to be attentive, to watch for critical events, to watch for our master's return. We're to be diligent, we're to be discerning and vigilant. Such work points toward and prepares for the one whom we affirm is surely at the very gates. The Passion narrative follows this passage in Mark's Gospel, the story of Jesus' final days, his arrest, death, burial, and resurrection. And in this account, we see both positive and negative examples of being awake and aware at critical moments. In the Garden of Gethsemane in chapter 14, Jesus asks his disciples to keep awake and pray. This is their work. They can't do it. They fall asleep. Jesus' prayer gets him ready for his tribulations, but the disciples won't be ready. They will desert Jesus when the crowd comes to arrest him. Peter will deny knowing him. They will miss their key moments to serve. But in contrast, we have the woman who anoints Jesus with costly ointment as he was at dinner in the house of Simon the leper in Bethany, later in chapter 13. She is alert. She sees what others miss. Jesus' critical passage is coming, and so she knows what she must do. She anoints him for burial. And Jesus affirms her good service. He says she did what she could, and he wants her example to be remembered and told in memory of her. In the midst of our terrors, our hope is cultivated in the disciplines of waiting with attention and vigilantly doing our God-given work. To quote another verse of our hymn, "Bring to our troubled minds, uncertain and afraid, the quiet of a steadfast faith, calm of a call obeyed. As I've been preparing this sermon, I've been on the lookout for calls obeyed that cultivate hope in the midst of terror. Examples where the divine invasion comes in beauty and power and is recognized as such. Such examples come in many shapes. In CH 100 this week, we're discussing the change of fortune the early church experienced in the 4th century. In 303, the so-called Great Persecution was instituted by Emperor Diocletian. Clergy were targeted for arrest, scriptures were destroyed, church property was confiscated. It was a time of terror for the Christians of the Roman Empire. And then just a decade later, Emperor Constantine granted Christians full legal permission to worship. Acting as the good politician he was, he wanted the Christians' powerful God to support his empire. And so he put imperial resources behind the building of magnificent churches. Seeing this reversal led one bishop, Eusebius of Caesarea, to write about the fulfillment of hope. He said, "For those of us who had fixed our hopes on the Christ of God, there is unspeakable happiness, and a divine joy blossomed in all hearts, as we saw that in every place that a little while before had been reduced to dust by the tyrant's wickedness was now coming back to life." Describing a new church building in the city of Thayer in northern Palestine, he wrote, "The cathedral is a marvel of beauty, utterly breathtaking. The evidence of our eyes makes the instruction through ears unnecessary." The divine had indeed invaded the empire. Next week, in the same course, we'll be discussing some of the revelations of divine love written by Julian of Norwich. This late medieval laywoman lived during a time of terror. The deadly bubonic plague repeatedly swept through her city. She wondered how the world could even stay in existence. She wrote that all that existed to her seemed as small as a hazelnut. In a near-death experience, she experienced her own divine invasion. Her priest held a crucifix before her, and Jesus infused her heart with joy and assured her that his passion provided her with all the strength she needed to face death. But then she recovered and took the life-altering step of becoming an anchoress. Walled into a cell, she spent the rest of her life ruminating on her visions and sharing her wisdom with those who saw her out. Julian looked suffering and death squarely in the face, found Jesus' motherly love, and famously came to affirm, "All shall be well, all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well." Now, perhaps your God-given task is not church leadership as a bishop or spiritual direction as an anchoress. Perhaps it's making music. Local classical composer Tina Davidson, and a former LTS student, wrote in her recent memoir, Let Your Heart Be Broken, about the importance of composing in the midst of her own health crisis. She quotes her journal, "I must get out of my emotional stasis. By Monday, I want to be working on music again so I can feel the future, so that I don't sink slowly into inactivity." Tina's award-winning music is a gift to others, often written in collaboration with community members. She teaches composition to school children and women in shelters. She writes, "I teach as an act of faith, a spiritual practice. I get up every day and do it. Here I say, this is what I have for you today. I find no master strokes or large, efficient gestures, only this one-on-one slow work that brings others into meaningful connection to the arts. Hopefully, a commitment to work close to the ground." In frightening times, her beautiful and powerful music brings hope. Not a composer? Maybe you're a writer. I had lunch a few weeks ago with one of our graduates, Nancy Fitzgerald. Nancy's work is to promote women's ordination in her Roman Catholic tradition. She's a skillful writer and turns her pen/keyboard to promoting this cause. The Catholic Church recently concluded a synod on synodality. In other words, a meeting of church leaders to talk about how to go about group decision-making. And for the first time in about 2,000 years, a third of the voting delegates were women. Now, Nancy wasn't one of those delegates, but she was in Rome at the time as a member of the Women's Ordination Conference. She wrote of her experience, "The world is a mess, getting worse by the day. The church, as you may have noticed, is a mess too. But the gospel breaks into that mess and powerfully, urgently offers another path." She continues, "The Vatican's final synod report may have been a disappointment, but we all knew from the beginning that the Catholic Church moves slowly, plodding through the centuries with a weird aversion to change. Still, there's so much reason to hope. The genie is out of the bottle, the toothpaste is out of the tube, women are at the Vatican, and we're not leaving. We are the church of everyone, after all, and the gospel gives us an optimism that's woven into our hearts and brains." As Nancy and I talked over lunch, she was brimming with hope, alert to the divine invasion, even as she continues to write. Perhaps your work is to offer encouragement to other believers. Last weekend, old friends of ours came to visit. We hadn't seen them in nearly 30 years. Anil and Meena are Christians from India who now live in Hong Kong. Anil works to encourage pastors in Asian countries who are experiencing very real persecution for being Christians. Trained as an investigative journalist, he travels widely, learning what life is like on the ground. And deeply prayerful, he works with local leaders to offer retreats for pastors and their spouses in teaching and prayer, in services of foot washing, in offering Christian marriage rituals, by providing stocks of food to augment their meager salaries. He offers encouragement to them. Anil described the tension the participants bring with them as they arrive at these retreats, being transformed into singing and dancing hope as they realize they are not alone and that others are prayerfully standing with them in faith. Hearing such witness to hope in times of terror encouraged us as well. And so, in these days of Advent waiting, stay awake. Be diligent and vigilant and discerning. Do the work God has given you to do, whatever it may be. Pay attention to how this work enables you to stay awake and keep watch. Are you seeing evidence of the divine invasion? If so, share it with others who are also waiting, so that in these days of terror, we may together cultivate the discipline of hope, that most eschatological of all virtues. Amen.